I trusted you with everything and this is how you repay me? June's voice cracked as she stared at the financial documents spread across her kitchen table, her hands trembling with a mixture of rage and heartbreak. Let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We love seeing how far our stories reach. Just 3 months earlier, June Morrison had been living comfortably in the same 2-story colonial home where she'd raised her family for 42 years. At 74, she was still sharp as a tack, tending to her prize-winning rose garden and hosting weekly bridge games with her longtime friends. Her husband Robert had passed away 2 years prior, leaving her with a substantial savings account, a paid-off mortgage, and enough pension income to live independently without worry. The trouble began when June took a minor fall while watering her plants on the front porch. Though she only bruised her hip and felt perfectly fine within a few days, her son David and daughter Lisa seized upon the incident like vultures circling prey. "Mom, we're just worried about you living alone," David had said during his first visit in months, his voice dripping with false concern. At 48, he'd always been the more manipulative of her 2 children, blessed with their father's charm, but cursed with a gambling addiction that had cost him 2 marriages and countless jobs. Lisa, 45 and equally opportunistic, nodded vigorously beside him. "What if something worse happens next time? What if you fall and can't get to the phone?" June had laughed off their concerns initially. "I've been taking care of myself just fine. Thank you very much. One little stumble doesn't make me an invalid." But David and Lisa were persistent, visiting more frequently, and painting increasingly dire pictures of the dangers June faced living alone. They brought printouts of statistics about elderly falls, newspaper clippings about break-ins in the neighborhood, and emotional appeals about how much they loved her and couldn't bear to lose her. "We found the perfect solution," Lisa announced during one of these visits, producing a glossy brochure, Premier Home Care Services. They provide in-home caregivers who can help with daily tasks, medication reminders, meal preparation, everything you need to stay safe and independent. June frowned as she flipped through the brochure. The smiling faces of professional-looking caregivers stared back at her, but something felt off. "I don't need a caregiver, I'm managing just fine on my own." "It's not about what you need now, Mom," David interjected. "It's about preventing problems before they happen. Think of it as insurance." The children's campaign continued for weeks. They called daily with new horror stories about elderly people who'd suffered alone, sent articles about the benefits of preventive care, and gradually wore down June's resistance with their relentless concern trolling. Finally, exhausted by their persistence and beginning to doubt her own judgment, June agreed to meet with someone from Premier Home Care Services. The woman who arrived at her door was friendly enough Sandra Walsh, a heavyset blonde in her 50s, who spoke in soothing tones about the importance of aging in place safely. "We're not here to take over your life, Mrs. Morrison," Sandra assured her as they sat in June's living room. "We're here to support your independence. Our standard package includes daily check-ins, light housekeeping, meal preparation assistance, and medication management for just $400 per week." June's eyes widened. $400? That seems like quite a lot. "Quality care is an investment in your health and safety," Sandra replied smoothly. "And really, when you consider what a nursing home would cost, this is quite economical." David and Lisa, who had conveniently arrived during the consultation, immediately jumped in to support Sandra's pitch. "Mom, your health is priceless," Lisa said. "Besides, you can afford it with Dad's life insurance money." Against her better judgment, June found herself signing a contract that very afternoon. The next week, Sandra began her daily care visits, which typically lasted about 30 minutes and consisted mainly of asking June how she was feeling, making her a cup of tea, and reminding her to take vitamins she'd been managing perfectly well on her own for decades. What June didn't know was that Sandra Walsh wasn't a licensed caregiver at all. She was David's girlfriend of 6 months, a woman he'd met at the casino who was equally desperate for money and equally willing to bend the truth to get it. Premier Home Care Services existed only on paper, a hastily created LLC with a fake website and a P.O. box address. The arrangement worked perfectly for the conspirators. Each week, June dutifully wrote a check for $400, believing she was paying for professional care. David would pick up the check from Sandra, deposit it into their shared account, and split the profits 3 ways. Sandra pocketed her share for minimal work, while David and Lisa congratulated themselves on their clever scheme. As weeks turned into months, the financial drain began to take its toll on June's carefully managed budget. She found herself dipping into savings to cover routine expenses, cutting back on groceries, and skipping her monthly hair appointments. But whenever she expressed concern about the cost of her care, Sandra was quick to remind her how much her children loved her and wanted her to be safe. "Your son calls me every day to check on you," Sandra would lie smoothly. "He's so devoted. You're lucky to have children who care so much." Meanwhile, across the street, Martha Chen had been watching the situation with growing concern. At 78, Martha was 4 years older than June but considerably more spry, still working part-time as a bookkeeper for local businesses and maintaining an eagle eye for neighborhood happenings from her kitchen window. Martha and June had been friends for over 2 decades, ever since Martha and her late husband had moved into the modest ranch house across the street. They'd weathered everything together: children's graduations, grandchildren's births, their husbands' deaths, and countless cups of coffee shared across June's kitchen table. Lately, however, Martha had noticed troubling changes in her friend. June seemed more withdrawn, declining invitations to their weekly bridge games and making excuses when Martha suggested their usual shopping trips. When they did talk, June appeared stressed and distracted, often mentioning money worries that seemed out of character for someone with her financial stability. Most concerning of all was this mysterious caregiver who seemed to come and go with suspicious irregularity. Martha had observed Sandra's visits from her window, noting that the woman rarely stayed long and never seemed to be doing anything that resembled actual caregiving. No medical equipment was ever brought to the house, no doctor's cars appeared for follow-up visits, and June certainly didn't appear to need the level of assistance that would justify such frequent professional visits. Martha's suspicions deepened when she noticed June's usually immaculate garden beginning to show signs of neglect. The roses that had been June's pride and joy were looking sparse and unkempt, and the lawn needed mowing tasks that June had always handled herself with meticulous care. During one of their brief conversations over the fence, Martha gently probed about June's new care arrangement. "How are you finding your new helper?" Martha asked, trying to keep her tone casual. June's face tightened slightly. "Oh, Sandra's very nice, very professional." "What sort of things does she help you with?" "Just general care things. David and Lisa think it's important for me to have someone checking on me regularly." Martha noticed June's reluctance to elaborate and the way she quickly changed the subject. It was clear that her friend was either uncomfortable discussing the arrangement or perhaps beginning to have doubts about it herself. That evening, Martha decided to do a little investigating of her own. Using her basic computer skills, she searched for premier home care services online. The website she found looked professional enough at first glance, but something about it struck her as odd. The photos looked generic, the testimonials seemed vague and interchangeable, and when she tried to find licensing information or reviews from other sources, she came up empty. Martha's concern grew when she discovered that Premier Home Care Services wasn't listed with the Better Business Bureau, the state's health department, or any of the professional caregiving associations she found during her research. For a company claiming to provide medical care to vulnerable elderly clients, the lack of official recognition was deeply troubling. But Martha knew she needed more than internet research to help her friend. She decided to involve June's grandchildren, college students who might have better investigative skills and more credibility with their grandmother than an elderly neighbor expressing vague concerns. Emma, 20, was a junior at the State University studying business administration. Her younger brother Jake, 18, was a freshman majoring in computer science. Both had always been close to their grandmother and had noticed changes in her behavior during recent family gatherings. "Grandma June seems different lately," Emma had mentioned to Jake during their last visit home. "She's always been so generous, but now she keeps talking about watching her spending, and she looks tired all the time." When Martha called Emma and shared her observations about the suspicious caregiver, the pieces began falling into place for both grandchildren. "Wait a minute," Jake said during their three-way phone conversation. "Dad and Aunt Lisa were the ones pushing for this caregiver thing, right? That's weird because they never seemed that concerned about Grandma before." Emma's business training kicked in immediately. "We need to look at this like a fraud investigation. What exactly is this company? Who are they paying?" And most importantly, what services is Grandma actually receiving for her money? The siblings decided to visit their grandmother under the pretense of a casual family dinner, but with the real intention of gathering information about her caregiver arrangement. They were shocked by what they discovered. June's usually well-stocked refrigerator was nearly empty. Bills were stacked on the kitchen counter, something they'd never seen before, as their meticulous grandmother had always paid everything immediately. Most telling of all, June seemed genuinely surprised when they asked about the specific services her caregiver provided. "Well, Sandra comes by most days," June said uncertainly. "She makes sure I'm all right, sometimes helps with small tasks around the house." "What kind of tasks?" Emma pressed gently. June paused, looking confused. Well, she usually just has a cup of tea with me and asks how I'm feeling. Sometimes she reminds me to take my vitamins." Jake and Emma exchanged glances. For $400 a week, their grandmother was essentially paying someone to drink tea with her. "Grandma, can you show us the contract you signed?" Emma asked. June retrieved the paperwork from a kitchen drawer, and the siblings immediately spotted several red flags. The contract was vaguely worded, with no specific services outlined. The company address was just a P.O. box, and there was no licensing information or insurance detail standard requirements for legitimate medical care providers. "This doesn't look right," Jake said, his computer science training making him naturally suspicious of anything that seemed too good to be true. "Can I look up this company online?" Using his laptop, Jake quickly discovered the same concerns that Martha had identified. But with his technical skills, he was able to dig deeper. The website's domain had been registered just 4 months ago, suspiciously close to when June's caregiver arrangement had begun. The photos on the site were stock images that appeared on multiple other websites. Most damning of all, the contact phone number led to a voicemail system that had never been professionally set up. "Grandma, I think you might be getting scammed," Emma said gently. June's face flushed with embarrassment and anger. "That's impossible. David and Lisa researched this company thoroughly. They wouldn't let me get involved with anything questionable." But even as she said the words, doubt was creeping into June's voice. Deep down, she'd always felt that something was off about the whole arrangement, but she'd trusted her children's judgment over her own instincts. Jake was already working on his laptop, using his technical skills to trace more information about Premier Home Care Services. Within an hour, he'd discovered that the company's phone number was registered to a cell phone account belonging to someone named Sandra Walshnot, exactly the kind of professional setup one would expect from a legitimate medical care company. Emma, meanwhile, was calculating the financial impact of the scam. "Grandma, you've been paying $400 a week for 3 months. That's over $4,000 for someone to drink tea with you once a day." The number hit June like a physical blow. $4,000 money that could have paid for real medical care, home improvements, or simply remained in her savings account for actual emergencies. "We need to confront Dad and Aunt Lisa about this," Jake said, his anger building as he realized the extent of his family member's betrayal. But Emma, ever the strategist, had a different idea. "First, we need proof. If we're going to accuse them of fraud, we need to be absolutely certain of our facts." Over the next week, the grandchildren worked with Martha to gather evidence. Jake used his computer skills to document the fake company's non-existent credentials, while Emma researched the legal requirements for legitimate caregiver services in their state. Martha kept detailed notes of Sandra's irregular visits, timing them and observing that the woman rarely stayed longer than 20 or 30 minutes. The breakthrough came when Jake decided to follow Sandra after one of her care visits. Maintaining a discreet distance, he watched as Sandra drove directly to a nearby casino, hardly the next appointment one would expect from a dedicated healthcare professional. More importantly, Jake observed Sandra meeting with David in the casino parking lot, where his father handed her an envelope in exchange for what appeared to be a check. The puzzle pieces were finally complete. Armed with evidence, Emma and Jake arranged a family dinner at June's house, insisting that both David and Lisa attend. They didn't mention their investigation, simply saying they wanted to discuss Grandma's care as a family. Martha, invited as June's longtime friend and advocate, arrived early to provide moral support. As the family gathered around June's dining room table, the atmosphere was tense with unspoken accusations and hidden guilt. We've been looking into Premier Home Care Services, Emma began, her voice steady despite her nervousness. And we've found some concerning information. David immediately went on the defensive. What kind of concerning information? They're a perfectly legitimate company. Jake opened his laptop and began presenting their findings. Actually, Dad, they're not legitimate at all. The company was registered 4 months ago, has no proper licensing, uses stock photos on their website, and their phone number belongs to Sandra Walsh personally. Lisa's face had gone pale, but she tried to maintain the facade. That doesn't mean anything. Lots of small businesses operate simply. Small businesses that provide medical care are required to have proper licensing and insurance, Emma countered, producing printouts of state regulations. Premier Home Care Services has neither. June, who had been listening in stunned silence, finally found her voice. David, Lisa, what exactly is going on here? The moment of truth had arrived, and David's composure finally cracked. Look, Mom Sandra is a friend of mine, okay? But she's perfectly qualified to help you. Qualified how? Martha interjected. What are her credentials? What medical training does she have? The silence that followed was deafening. Finally, Lisa broke down. She doesn't have formal medical training, but she's a caring person who genuinely wants to help. Jake leaned forward, his voice cold with anger. Help with what? Drinking tea? Because that's literally all she does during her visits. June's hands were shaking as the full scope of the betrayal became clear. You've been stealing from me. My own children have been stealing from me. It's not stealing, Mom, David protested desperately. You're getting care. You're getting someone to check on you and make sure you're safe. For $400 a week? June's voice was rising. To have someone drink tea with me for 30 minutes. Do you think I'm stupid? Emma placed a gentle hand on her grandmother's arm. Grandma, you're not stupid, you're trusting, and they took advantage of that trust. The confrontation that followed was devastating. Years of resentment and financial desperation poured out as David and Lisa attempted to justify their actions. They claimed they were worried about June's safety, that the money was for her own good, that they deserved compensation for their concern about her welfare. But their arguments fell apart under scrutiny. Neither had visited their mother regularly before the caregiver scheme began. Neither had shown genuine interest in her well-being beyond what they could financially gain from it. And neither could explain why they hadn't simply suggested that June hire a legitimate caregiver if they were truly concerned about her safety. I trusted you with everything, and this is how you repay me? June said, her voice breaking as the full emotional impact of the betrayal hit her. Martha stood up, her own anger finally boiling over. You should be ashamed of yourselves. Your mother raised you, sacrificed for you, and this is how you treat her in her golden years? Jake was already on his phone. I'm calling the police. This is fraud and it's elder abuse. Wait, June said quietly. Everyone turned to look at her, surprised by the sudden calm in her voice. Before we involve the authorities, I want to hear them admit what they've done. I want them to look me in the eye and tell me the truth. David and Lisa exchanged panicked glances. They knew they were caught, but they also knew that their mother's love for them might be their only chance to avoid criminal charges. Mom, we're sorry, Lisa began, tears streaming down her face. We never meant for it to go this far. How far did you mean for it to go? June asked pointedly. We needed money, David admitted. I've been having some financial problems, and Lisa's been struggling since her divorce. When you had that fall, we saw an opportunity to help you while also helping ourselves. By lying to me? By stealing from me? By making me doubt my own judgment and independence? The weight of their actions was finally sinking in. They had not only stolen money from their mother, they had stolen her confidence, her peace of mind, and her sense of security in her own home. Emma had been quietly calculating on her phone. You've taken over $4,000 from Grandma in 3 months. That's grand theft in this state. We'll pay it back, Lisa said desperately. Every penny. With what money? Jake asked coldly. You just admitted you're both broke. Martha spoke up again. The money is just part of the damage. June has been stressed, anxious, and doubting herself for months because of your scheme. How do you plan to pay back her peace of mind? June stood up slowly, her decision made. I want you both to leave my house. I need time to think about what happens next. Mom, please, David begged. We're family, we can work this out. Family doesn't steal from family, June replied firmly. Family doesn't lie to family, and family doesn't take advantage of trust and love for money. As David and Lisa gathered their things and left, the house fell silent except for June's quiet crying. Emma and Jake sat on either side of their grandmother, while Martha made tea in the kitchen. I feel so foolish, June whispered. How could I not have seen what was happening? You saw it, Emma said gently. You knew something was wrong, but you trusted them because they're your children, and trust isn't foolish, it's human. Jake nodded. They're the ones who should feel foolish and ashamed. And hopefully, eventually, they'll face consequences for what they've done. Over the following days, the family worked together to clean up the mess left by David and Lisa's scheme. Emma helped June cancel the fake caregiver service and change her bank account information. Jake documented everything for potential legal action. Martha provided emotional support and helped June begin to rebuild her confidence. The most important step was getting June's money back. While David and Lisa claimed to be broke, Jake's investigation revealed that David had been using some of the stolen money for gambling, while Lisa had been spending it on luxury items she couldn't afford. Both had assets that could be liquidated to repay their mother. Faced with the threat of criminal charges and armed with undeniable evidence of their fraud, both siblings eventually agreed to full restitution. David was forced to sell his expensive car and take out a loan to cover his portion, while Lisa liquidated her jewelry and other luxury items. The process took several weeks, but eventually, June recovered every penny they had stolen. More importantly, June began to recover her sense of independence and self-worth. With Martha's encouragement and her grandchildren's support, she realized that she had been perfectly capable of caring for herself all along. The minor fall that had started this whole ordeal was just that minor. She didn't need a caregiver, fake or otherwise. I think I was so afraid of becoming a burden that I let them convince me I already was one, June reflected during one of her renewed bridge games with Martha and their other friends. The legal consequences for David and Lisa were severe but fair. Rather than pressing criminal charges, June worked with a lawyer to establish a formal repayment plan and to ensure that neither child would have access to her financial accounts in the future. She also required both to attend counseling to address the underlying issues that had led them to steal from their own mother. The emotional consequences were more complex. June's relationship with her children was permanently damaged, though not necessarily beyond repair. Both David and Lisa had to earn back their mother's trust through actions, not words. They had to demonstrate genuine remorse and make real changes in their lives before June would consider rebuilding their relationship. Emma and Jake, meanwhile, had learned valuable lessons about protecting elderly family members from financial exploitation. They established regular check-ins with their grandmother, not as caregivers or monitors, but as loving grandchildren who wanted to stay connected to her life. Martha's role in exposing the schemes strengthened her friendship with June even further. The two women had always been close, but going through this crisis together had proven the depth of their loyalty to each other. 6 months after the confrontation, June was thriving. Her rose garden had returned to its former glory, her bridge games were regular events again, and her savings account was fully restored. She had also become an advocate for other elderly people in her community, sharing her story to help others recognize and avoid similar scams. The worst part wasn't losing the money, June told a group at the community center during one of her talks about elder fraud. The worst part was losing faith in my own judgment. These scammers don't just steal your money, they steal your confidence and independence. Sandra Walsh, the fake caregiver at the center of the scheme, faced her own consequences. When June's lawyer investigated the situation thoroughly, they discovered that Sandra had been involved in similar scams targeting other elderly victims. She eventually faced criminal charges for fraud and elder abuse, receiving a sentence that included restitution to multiple victims and community service. David's gambling addiction, exposed during the investigation, finally received the professional treatment it needed. The crisis had forced him to confront the extent of his problem and its impact on his family relationships. Recovery was a long process, but it was the first step toward potentially rebuilding his relationship with his mother. Lisa's financial irresponsibility, while less pathological than David's gambling, also required significant changes. She had to learn to live within her means and find legitimate ways to address her financial struggles, rather than exploiting her mother's trust and generosity. As winter turned to spring, June found herself stronger and more independent than she had felt in years. The ordeal had tested her resilience and family relationships, but it had also revealed the depth of support available to her from those who truly cared about her well-being. Standing in her garden one morning, admiring the new buds on her prize roses and planning her day of activities with Martha and other friends, June reflected on the lessons she had learned. Trust was still important, but it needed to be earned and verified. Independence was precious and shouldn't be surrendered without genuine necessity. And most importantly, real love and care couldn't be bought or faked. They showed themselves through actions, consistency, and genuine concern for another person's well-being. The Caregiver Con had cost June money, stress, and emotional pain, but it had also taught her valuable lessons about recognizing and resisting manipulation. She was determined to use those lessons not only to protect herself in the future, but to help other elderly people avoid falling victim to similar schemes. In the end, June's story became one of triumph over exploitation, of real family bonds overcoming greed and deception, and of an elderly woman reclaiming her power and independence with the help of those who truly loved her. The poetic justice wasn't just in the financial restitution or legal consequences, it was in June's renewed confidence, stronger relationships with her grandchildren and Martha, and her transformation from victim to advocate. As she often told the groups she spoke to, they thought they could take advantage of an old woman, but they forgot that this old woman raised children, built a life, and survived decades of challenges. I'm stronger than they gave me credit for, and with the right people in your corner, you're stronger than the scammers think too. Thank you for listening until the end. If you enjoyed the story, please consider leaving us a like. This helps us reach more people.